Mayor Jacobs,
I am here.
Committeeman Hickey,
Here.
Mr. Travelini is not, Mr. Rogelius,
Present.
Mr. Leonard,
Here.
Mr. DiGiovanni,
Here.
Mr. Arvana. Here. Mr. Walter.
Here.
Mr. First.
Here.
Ms. Christie. Here. Chairwoman Gotcha. Here. Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board is filed with the Township Clerk, sent to the Burnsville News and the Courier News, and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 6, 2022.
Please stand for the flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Said Rich wasn't.
Someone else works.
He's here.
Okay, we'll open it up to the public if they have anything that they would like to talk about. It's not on the agenda.
There is no public, we only have that from Stonefield.
Public, we have our county planner here.
Well,
Okay, we have minutes from May 5th. If you've had a chance to look at them, approve our minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone have to abstain?
We were there.
You were not there.
Right.
Zoning?
Yep.
Okay. So minutes are approved. We also have a resolution, single man estate. Motion for resolution.
Motion. Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Travelini,
Aye.
Mr. Rogelius,
Aye.
Mr. Leonard,
Aye.
Mr. DiGiovanni,
Aye.
Ms. Arvana,
Aye.
Mr. Walter.
Aye.
Mr. First.
Aye.
Ms. Christie. Aye. Chairwoman Gotcha.
Aye. The resolution is approved.
I thought we did that one. Yes. That's on the minutes. We did that last month.
We did, we already did that?
We already did that one. It's in the minutes, last month as well. Once we had for it. I hope we did because we already signed the deeds and.
That's right, we did.
I think we have
the 405 resolution.
Yeah, the 405 resolution, 405 Main Street with the garage in the backyard. and
Right.
pharmacist,
Yeah.
house. That's what we're doing tonight, but you were probably reading from the minutes. which-
Oh, right,
Yeah.
it was,
The
I'm
printout.
sorry. Yes, you're right, you're right, I'm
I
reading,
just want to make sure the record.
yes, you're right, okay. we'll
405
correct
is
the
what we got in front of us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we're doing the
Typo on the
resolution.
minutes only?
We
No,
are.
no, 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 well,
Okay, so we're doing the resolution for 405 Main LLC, and that is the one that's before us.
That is what I have on
no.
the.
And that's
Yeah,
what-
it was my fault, I was
Oh.
reading from the minutes, I didn't turn my minutes over, and I'm reading here from this list here.
And that's why Larry and
Right,
Ben Collins were not involved in Main Street.
Correct.
Because
Yeah.
that was a prior use variance, or
That's
a D variance, and it was an amendment to a D variance without any new order.
Right.
For keeping us straight.
Okay.
there you go, yes, okay, so we need a motion for 405 Main LLC.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call, try again.
Mr. Travelini,
Aye.
Mr. Rogelius,
Aye.
Mr. Leonard,
Aye.
Mr. DiGiovanni,
Aye.
Ms. Arvana,
Aye.
Mr. Walter.
Aye.
Mr. First.
Aye.
Ms. Christie. Aye. Chairwoman Gotcha.
Aye. Resolution is approved. That's why I was getting confused in the order of the agenda, because I was reading off the wrong thing. Okay, so we go into the rezoning for AT&T properties consistent with the recommendations from this study.
Well, we're gonna do plan endorsement first.
We're gonna do that first,
Yes.
okay? All right, we will do that first. We'll do the plan endorsement. And who's going to speak on that behalf?
Frank Banner.
I think I.
Hi, Frank.
Nice to be this physically close to all of you again after,
How long has it been?
what was it, years?
Yeah.
Probably.
2 years.
Did you have a beard the last time we saw you? I think, plan endorsement is something that the town has chosen to pursue. And Walter and Tom both have a good understanding of how this process works, but I mentioned Walter specifically because when we get into the AT&T study, it's advancing things that we're going to be asking for in plan endorsement. Plan endorsement is a process whereby the state responds to the documents that our self-assessments that we provided them with reports from state agencies. We got them, I hope you got them from Department of Environmental Protection and Department of Transportation. DEP has a laundry list of things they'd like us to do, and if a lot of them look like they're things we already did, they are in some fashion, maybe not exactly the way they wanted us to, but there are other things that they're suggesting we would amend our ordinances to include. There is a plan implementation agenda that results from essentially the handshake between the state agency and the municipality. And Walter's role as the county participant in that process, in the regional planning process, is he facilitates with us. He doesn't have to do anything, but he's well known for doing a lot to move the process along, as he has with us, not only with the AT&T study, but with this whole process. So what we're being asked to do now are look at those reports and get back to the state and either agree with what they've suggested. If we're going to disagree with it, the best reason would be because we already did what you're asking for. But the second best reason would be because it conflicts with a legitimate principled objective that we have. So we wouldn't do that because. Now, a lot of the things they're saying, like, don't let people build in the 500-year floodplain anymore, sounds very logical. Sounds like our kind of planning like we've been doing for years until it's your house and your building permit that you need to get and your property that you've never seen flood in your whole life. Maybe now you have in the last few years. You know, so there will be some of those things that I think Paul and Tom and I should come back to you and say, here's the no-brainers. Here are the things we need you all to help us agree or not agree with the state on. Because ultimately, that agenda is approved and endorsed by the governing body, but it's more or less being negotiated through this process with you. The things that we have to do then are, there's the map of centers. And you may recall that AT&T never fit neatly into the delineation of either the Pluckerman Center or the state highway dividing it away, or the Bedminster Center with a lot of public open space and particularly a lot of wetlands and other environmentally sensitive lands dividing it away from that center. So we couldn't convince the state, at least not yet, that they should make it part of one or the other of those centers. But there is another opportunity for it to be considered with the benefits that go to a center. And earlier today, Tom suggested that I forgot to ask Walter earlier today, if we were to get that non-center designation for specifically for the AT&T site, do the emerge funding benefits go to that site?
Yeah, so if it's designated as a core or a targeted growth area or / redevelopment area, it's my understanding that that would qualify as part of the endorsed plan to ensure those benefits in that program are eligible.
Right, people ask.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite, could you go back 2 or 3 sentences? I apologize.
Sure.
I didn't quite understand what you said.
Yeah, there's
In other words.
the state of New Jersey has incentive programs. One of them, economic incentive programs. One of them is the emerge program. One of the benefits of going through this plan endorsement process is you get your centers or other growth areas designated by the state, and they become eligible for things you can't get if you're not one of those.
Right.
So what Walter was just confirming was that just like the centers in Pluckerman and Bedminster, AT&T, once it becomes a designated node for growth, would be eligible for those same benefits. The whole reason we're going through all this, more or less twofold. On the one hand, it's always nice for the state to tell you your master plan is pretty close to perfect. If anybody wants to challenge you on any of it, and we've been challenged in the past. But more importantly, it really gives the opportunity for there to be, so, I'm from government, I'm here to help. There's actually an opportunity for a working partnership. And I'm not just saying it because Walter's here. Somerset County has done an amazing job of being our planning partner, as long as I've been your planner. I mean, they've been on the job, but there's been such a disconnect once you got beyond the county level. Now, all of a sudden, the state's at our doorstep saying, yeah, we want to give you some technical assistance, and some other benefits, and some priorities for funding, and some unique funding opportunities if you'll go through this process. So what we have to do now is agree or disagree with the mapping that they've come up with. Their mapping shows two centers very much along the lines of our residential and commercial zones in Plumpton and Bedminster. And we can micromanage the line a little bit, but it's not something where I think we have a big issue there. The issue we have is getting that node at AT&T included on the map.
Can you have more than one node?
Yes.
Walter, you might want to move up here to the microphone here,
No, they're
since
not.
you've got lots of space.
No, they're not quite as good as centers. I'm hopeful that they are eligible for the Emerge program.
I think it's on, Walter.
I'm hopeful they're eligible for the Emerge program. I still have my legal argument that AT&T is part of Bedminster Center. And I think we could maybe convince the planners at LPA, maybe not convince the DEP. And why? Because planners think more logically than environmental. That's just me, I do vote for everybody, okay? So basically, why do I say that? Because the separation of AT&T from the Bedminster Center is floodplain, river, parklands, preserved land, basically. What, is it connected? Yeah. 206 connects, and one of the greatest bikeway walkways in the state of New Jersey exists, was funded in part by the federal DOT for bikeway overpasses, which nobody else has, or very few people have. And to you, they're connected. You know, you could walk from Bedminster Center to work at 8. People do it. Not enough, but basically it's definitely there and it's definitely connected and it's preserved. So what difference does it make if the wetlands and the riparian buffer and the river is in the center? Because it will never be developed. It will never be developed. The bottom line.
So your position is
I still
that it
think-
may already be included in the town center, but we have an opportunity to go in a different direction that would give us all the benefits of the town center, but to formalize that process.
If you want to, I still think it's worth one more shot at convincing the planning officials, Donna and Darrell.
Walter's shaking his head yes for the
And
record.
we're talking to you about it. We would like it to be part of the center, either one. I think that this is the logical one because it's on that side of the town, okay? This side of the town. If we could get it into the center, we know that it's benefited by the Emerge program. We know that it's a center, but also as you're planning for attorney for years and Frank too, it's also connected. It is what it is. You have had AT&T there for 30 years. You have had this linkage. You have this incredible open space that resulted from that grandiose corporate development, right? Part of your fiber is part of what exists in the center of Bedminster. And it's, but the reason they don't like to put things like that in, guess
Yeah.
what? It's because it's separated by a river and parkland, your ball fields, your bikeway, your walkway, and your wetlands and your transition areas and your riparian buffers. So to me, it's really part of Bedminster Center. And I think we could convince them.
So Bedminster Center already includes the library, the mountain property.
Not yet.
And-
That's the proposed.
Oh, this is
That's the proposed, yeah, and that's a good change, that's an addition, that Mount Craft being added is a good thing.
Right.
But I'm saying to you, they want you to take out your park, they want you to take out your bikeway, they want you to take out your riparian area, they want you to take out your wetlands, they want you to take out the preserved, whatever it is, Moreland Farms. I don't, you know.
Not to mention the fact that Emerge is not all it's cracked up to be anyway.
Yeah, so say the least, and all other things I'm going to say, but the reality is, if you like it as part of the center, this is our chance to ask for it. And
So on this handout for the
For the proposed center.
So that's the proposed center. So right now, this yellow dash line for Bedminster Center includes Mount Cot and advanced property,
Right.
but has not been redrawn to include AT&T.
That's right, and it's been redrawn by them to exclude, I believe, your ball field, your bikeway, your open space that you connected to what, your school, your town
So why
center.
would we care if that was in there? It's not gonna, no one's gonna be developing that. You don't need
That's
to
my
know.
point, they don't see, and people at DP, they don't think like that, like, they don't like, if something's open space, they still don't get it, that open space could be in a center, right?
So there's no advantage, I mean, to.
There's no, but there's no advantage except if we link it, if we include it, then it abuts AT&T, and then AT&T abuts Bedminster Center, and.
But there is an advantage of having it in there, because also, if it's in a center, it should have higher priority. So if you're applying for a grant, let's say some sort of grant to do improvements in that park,
Right. like a
a
dog
center
park.
will
You
get
want a
higher
dog park,
priority.
you want a dog park there, I don't know everybody.
It's the size of the
You
grant.
wanna try to get a grant, you'll get a more chance of a grant for the state in a center than outside the center, that's the bottom line.
So if we can convince the planners, because it sounds like we have a legitimate reason to include it. And we can't convince the DEP, do we lose?
No, they can.
Right, like what's the,
Well, DP thinks they always win, bottom line is the state planning commission wins, but one of their members is the assistant commissioner of the DP. It's hard to get the vote to go over that, okay? But it happens, or people work things out, and I don't think this is a fight, I think this is a collaboration.
Can't just
I can share.
AT&T as a new area, not as a
Not
new
a
center,
center.
but.
That's
And
the
then
thing.
expand the center boundary.
But just get all the same benefits.
That's
but-
that's the concept, it's still a challenge, but DEP in their report said maybe an economic development node on the developed portion of AT&T could be considered.
Alright.
So that's a beginning,
So, but not the whole property.
not the whole property, but we don't really want the whole property. Okay.
So the amount of money that you are eligible for directly related to the number of acres that are in a particular area?
Not the acres, it's more like these other things are tied to like emerge is tied to
Jobs.
job generation. Thomas is the developer will generate certain, I don't know, but it's a large number of jobs. I'm not confident that anybody's gonna qualify for emerge funding in Bedminster.
Merge is really targeted for the cities anyway.
Right.
With all of their transportation incentives. So you start out with a, pretty small number. And if you're close to a train, if you can do all these, progressive kind of infrastructure things, and I'm being totally frank here, then the number almost double what the base number is. So we're out here in the burbs. The conditions that they're gonna put on somebody to do it here in Bedminster are gonna far outweigh any benefit. I got a guy up in Bergen County who did the emerge and almost regrets it at this point.
But here's the bottom line, the current map of the emerge program shows only the town centers. It doesn't even show already existing corporate campuses with significant development that exist, which is supposed to be eligible for emerge under the statute and regulations. So if you don't get it into something, AT&T property will never be eligible for it. So something is either center or economic development node, maybe redevelopment, I'm not a real confident. No, I don't know, I don't really believe they don't even know what a redevelopment area really is anyway. So basically, you want to get on a map, because that map is how you check the box that you're.
So if a future administration,
Yeah.
it's,
And right now-
takes emerge back towards the way the other one was, which was a little bit more, because I've had somebody call this New Jersey growth light emerge, right? So if it goes back to something more like New Jersey growth, which was a little bit more money, especially for the suburbs, eligible price. So if we're not on the map now, we may never get on the map.
If you're not on the map, like you can't even, like you try to apply and you can't even check the box.
Yeah.
So-
I'm sorry.
The plan is to redraw that line, and how would you draw that line?
Well, let's go to Walden.
Yeah, Walden,
They have better ideas about this than I do.
So the issue you're dealing with is no different. This has come up in other centers that, in other plan endorsements. So with Millstone Borough, we argued over a single lot that was in the sewer service area. Ultimately, both the Office of Planning Advocacy advocated on behalf of the borough as well as the county. And ended up, I'll be frank, that DEP voted no at the Plan Implementation Committee meeting and at the State Planning Commission meeting, but it passed. Like it was like 10-1 or something like that. So if DEP doesn't agree, they can be outvoted. And I think the state planning, staff, we've had, at the county to the Office of Planning Advocacy, we had these discussions because DEP is shrinking the centers, and I had the same arguments that I had joked that if Manhattan was being designated a center, Central Park would not be part of the center, following their guidelines and I said, ultimately, that doesn't make sense because that open space, those amenities that Tom spoke about are amenities that make the center what it is. The center doesn't have, it's supposed to be more than just developable land and developed land. And ultimately, you can make an argument that you want to do additional greenways or restoration of the floodplain corridor. So in my theory, in my opinion, having it in a center should give it higher priority than something else. And this is where we want to make those improvements. So the county has been very steadfast in arguing that and supporting positions like the township is considered taking. So we will argue the same thing because we don't want our priority growth, our priority growth investment areas and our county investment framework to become Swiss cheese with that, because there's nothing saying that you can't be environmentally sensitive features in a center. In fact, the state planning commission, the state planning rules allow a center boundary to be a river, which would mean that would include floodplain area. Doesn't mean you're going to promote growth in that area, but an amenity as open space and a riverfront access is an amenity that development may want to be around, but doesn't necessarily have to be developed on. So we're trying to create vibrant places, centers in these growth areas. That means having open space and amenities in those areas. So it's an argument we're dealing with DEP staffing, but just because they say no, it still may go forward, is what I'm trying to share.
The other thing I think it's important is you keep hearing references to green infrastructure, which has all kinds of benefits, including being in the park that you like to go walk your dog in or whatever. So I think when Tom first said we should fight for that, it's really hard to get DEP to say, even though they've already told you 10 ways from Sunday, you can't do anything in that land, to get them to say they'll put it in a center where you're encouraging growth. They sit there and they boggles their mind. How can we say encourage growth and also put the land in there? And Walter's point is a good one, and Tom's point. We have
smart growth.
connected.
Yeah.
It's not called lack of planning, it's called smart growth. Smart means something.
So those lands are part of the fabric of the center. They're actually.
So all those amenities would be integrated into the planning process as opposed to, we're gonna just pave this whole zone
We can even say they'll
and build
never,
more buildings in this zone.
right, it's never gonna happen, like, your ball field is never gonna be developed, I'm sorry.
People don't wanna play ball with it anymore.
It can't happen, it's probably green acres in between.
Oh, yeah, it's all.
I mean, it's like guaranteed, if there's anything guaranteed in life, it's parklands like that.
It took us years to get your Green Acres land back to the firehouse.
Yeah.
Years.
I mean, but I don't think it's worth like losing the battle, or not getting state plan endorsement. And the alternative is economic development mode, and that's what we back down to, obviously, if we can't get the center. But it's sort of up to you too, is, what do you want to push for? But like a good example is, I'm not 100% sure, but I bet the county in 2009 or 10, when they did their then state planning commission strategic growth plan for the county of Somerset and land areas, they probably included AT&T in a strategic growth area.
It's one of our priority growth investments.
Priority growth investments, and that was approved by the state planning commission. That was
Not only
that
approved, it was
got awards
handled.
by the state planning
That's right.
commission.
It was.
So, was it in the center? No, it was not in the center on their state map, but they approved it. Right? Good.
Sounds like a good argument.
You can do something. Now you're in endorsement. Now you're trying to like fit these round pegs in square holes. It's really weird. That's what you have to do. You can try. And I don't think we fall completely on deaf ears. People like Donna Ruggiero, not sure about Barry, but maybe Barry would agree. The planner. And maybe if we got to talk to DP planner, he used to be very proud. Creative. Maybe we can convince them, because they're not like, this is not like a huge problem. This is not, there's no problem with anything we're talking about.
There's an EDA state planning commission member, so they see, there's other state agencies that kind of see the bigger picture on some of these things.
Yeah, and they would see that, if AT&T is gonna leave Bedminster and the center of New Jersey, we need to fill that. That's an opportunity. That's like the center of the universe.
So the goal would be to add the greenway and the developed part of AT&T to our
Right,
bed, so it would go like.
right, just wiggle the line around it, and if you want me to cut out something that satisfies them, that's okay, but the center should be configured, they should be connected.
So what do you, what's the next step? How do you?
Yeah, I think the next step is that we propose 2 center maps. One that has AT&T connected to Pluckett and the other one that has it connected to Bedminster, so that they just can't get over the river part of it. Maybe they can get over the highway.
Do we run into any, worry that they then cut back the Bedminster Center area and remove Malacroft? Is that right?
No, as a matter of fact, that they are looking to get everything worth having in the center.
So according to this map now, the Bedminster Center has been expanded, and that's to our advantage.
That's right, and it's a lot.
And we're going to endorse that. We're going to say you.
We'll say, yeah, absolutely.
And
What about Pluckett Center? Has that grown, or is that?
Not really. And in fact, if you look below 78, 287, and then the corner, corner there, I think that's kind of no man's land. It wasn't in the center, but where the Sweets on Bell's supposed to go.
Well, on the other side of 78?
South side of 78.
Oh, where that, that purple section? Yeah.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, there you go.
Just
I got that out, yeah.
By the way, another rule of the center convention is supposed to be that sewer service areas are contiguous with centers. So it's logical to include AT&T into the center, because it's in the sewer service area for more than 30 years. It's sewer. It's the main customer.
I think we know who's going to present our argument.
So like, I don't know how you just ignore that, it's there. It's not like it's new or proposed. Even though what we're thinking of doing on the zoning is basically consistent with center planning. It's not good. Because you're trying to encourage people to do more things that maybe they would be able to get easily to work from Pluckett and Bedminster.
So next step.
I think the next step, I'd like Walter to, since you've done a lot of this, to see if he agrees. If we bring back to you the mapping for the centers that gets AT&T in one way or the other, and a summary of the DOT and DEP opportunities and constraints reports with a line by line, either yes, we did this, or why we should or shouldn't do it. You guys can look at that, you all can look at that together, say, yeah, that's our position. And Tom and I can go back to them with the map and our position on those reports, and that sets the basis for the plan implementation agenda. Is that pretty fair?
Correct.
And that might be a good one for Walter, me, Frank, Larry, to talk to them at least on a Zoom call or something, or maybe see them, because it's hard to, you know the town so much better than me. And they need to see that you care enough and you know, just making these things up, real world properties, and they mean a lot with that. So, and that goes a long way sometimes. I'm not even convinced DP could be convinced. I don't know.
This has a timing issue, right, Tom?
Yeah, well, there's a nice letter that I don't understand a lot, but basically they're extended, the centers are extended, and the endorsement process is ongoing.
We're into the beginning of next year, but they're kind of cautioning us that you better, like my father always used to say, you better do better.
Keep trying,
Yes.
stay in the pipeline, is basically what Donna and.
Keep on talking, huh? Keep on talking.
Basically,
But I think-
show a good faith effort that you're continuing to move through the process.
And I don't see any reason for us to drag the process out at this point, really. So I would think in the next couple of meetings, we can come back with everything I just mentioned to you as for you to review, see ahead of time and review, and then we'll go back to the state with your responses. You're
No,
gonna
but
send
you are
it
making
to-
very good progress. You're doing very well. You have a municipal self-assessment report, endorsed by the township committee, issued to them, they've done a review. That's great.
I'd like to ask a question. Let's project forward. Let's say that we get the AT&T property and the green lands included and the center map is increased and it's approved. What are the actual can you list of what the benefits of that would be for the township in the future or for the people who live here? Other than being on the map?
When your zoning was challenged, state plan is a completely voluntary document, so nobody has to do what the state plan says. What we and many others were able to persuade the court was, when you align your local planning with the county and the state planning the way we did, and all of those goals and objectives come together, you can do some really unusual things like 10 acre, which turns into 20 and 30 acre zoning, the way it's been done. So those are the kinds of things that you want to make sure as you go forward that the bedrock of your planning that you've been living with and counting on stays in place, that nothing's going to upset that apple cart. An endorsed plan is sort of like the gold standard, I would say. So,
Yes.
so even if none of those other benefits rise to the highest level, you can sleep pretty well at night knowing that the town already spent a fortune defending this plan. You might as well get the rest of the benefit of all the work you did. And we're close to the end. It's not like this is not a 2-year process where we've got to spend a fortune. We're almost done.
You know your streets, you know your roads, you know your interstates. You are the crossroads of interstates in New Jersey. Your land that is in the R10 is in those crossroads, right in the crosshairs, as other people say, because they want to develop it. As a result of your defense of the R10 zoning, which involved Frank explaining a bright line test of nothing beyond the centers. You don't have a lot of office buildings beyond the centers. You don't have a lot of storage beyond the centers. You don't have any multi-family housing beyond the centers. You have been able to defend the largest lot zoning in the state of New Jersey in a conventional zoning challenge. That endorsement was one of 7 or 8 prongs of defense that helped you. And it still helps you. It's intangible, it's intangible. There's supposed to be eligibility for grants and loans, and it's supposed to be like if you needed to apply for sidewalk grant and streetlights for renovating a sidewalk in an area of the center. You're supposed to have higher priority. I don't know if that happens.
Technical assistance shouldn't be written on. It's not like those are just words. I can't say, until you need it,
To paraphrase what Tom's saying though, so we will be able to protect the character of the town, the majority of which is open space, 10 acre zoning, et cetera, by potentially fortifying and slightly expanding those zones so that any development that does take place takes place in zones where it already exists. So we're just expanding those and incentivizing people to continue to develop in those areas rather than encroach on those areas that we've fought so hard to protect.
Which is exactly what the state plan
Couldn't have
says.
said it better.
You can read that in like 20 sentences throughout the state plan, all right?
So what you really have done is you have taken those lines that you hoped you could defend and you've locked them in place. And you put walls around them.
And it's working in a sense because like Mallinckrodt was not in the center in 2003 or 2006, but then got developed and now is appropriate for the center. It was already in an OR zone, but it wasn't fully developed. So basically, we're sort of refining it now. We're back, you've done master plan amendments. The state plan have never been amended. Never been formally amended since 2003. So all this stuff about we should do stuff, they haven't done anything on a statewide basis, but you have. And so now we want to try to make sure that it's good to get the state planning commission, it's a very formal body, very complex membership, to give you plan endorsement again. You're one of the few towns that actually got full plan endorsement. It's very few. And you did, and you could again, but it's, I can't say that they need it, because not really need it, it's something good. Frank and Walter, they're great, you know, and I think if Larry talks to Donna and try to explain it, I think they might go for it.
Will this help us with our affordable housing? Does it?
It indirectly does, but why?
You won't get your plan endorsed if you haven't addressed your affordable housing obligations, and you have for well into the future. So there's probably no town in New Jersey I know of, including all the ones around Quartermaster, that has less to worry about when it comes to affordable housing than Bedminster.
No, but I mean, this plan, I mean, could this help us? I mean, could this be an argument going forward?
It's more of that solidification of all of your policies as being blessed, sort of like the Pope came down and said, it's all good.
So that it would help us and protect us going forward.
Yes,
It will, and also the way the formulas work is they have less multiplier, you know, lower multiplier. Because you have endorsement and you have controlled development and develop plan inside center. Outside the center doesn't count as much for the multiplier. Right? And that's a good thing in the formulas used until until the last round, third round, someone can pick the fourth round. But if you assume inertia, it will be very similar to the third round, which is lower multipliers in planning area 5, which is your entire town except the center. Okay, planning area 5 is called environmentally sensitive planning area. And by the way, that was something that Bedminster asked for and got approved, even though they wanted to put you in substantially into RA rural
agriculture, yeah.
You do promote agriculture, but you also promote protection of the environment, and we got that designation changed in 2006, I think.
They said environmentally sensitive agriculture. You said that's the wrong priority. You got it backwards. They said, okay, so environmental preservation, conservation is the priority. That's where you got the planning area 5, which is the environmentally sensitive planning area.
And that is good, and this makes sense for your town. So, but that's not changing. Nobody's trying to change that now, and we should.
So it seems like what you're describing, a lot of the goals of this protection, you know, so we'd be able to protect the things for the town and some of those, you know, R10 areas and the open spaces and all that good stuff. But what kind of conditions does it throw on you for development within the zones? So when you start talking about things like, you know, 500, you know, year floodplains and, you know, what they now call environmental justice, you know, so by signing on, do we have to bargain for all that stuff? Using a good word, stuff too?
We do have to be, yes, we have to be careful to make sure they don't impose anything that we can't live with. I have to say, I think you're actually kind of more, I don't know, I really don't understand the detail, but by the way, there's a whole new emergency rulemaking.
Yes.
That is very draconian and it's like adopted like emergency rulemaking effective.
Are you on stormwater or are you on something else?
No, I'm not stormwater, but.
It's gonna get, pulled.
Okay,
Is it
so,
really?
but that shows you,
$50,000 revising my plans?
Doesn't mean it's not coming back.
yeah, that shows, it will come as a non-emergency rule, but basically that shows you this sort of a tendency towards climate change modification of current engineering and regulatory standards. So, but that being said, you still have to be careful that you're not committing to do something you won't live with. The reason I said, I think, Frank, Paul isn't here, but basically, I'm sure Paul could give you, more detail that you already regulate in Bedminster about septic and floodplain and flood hazard area, and we have incredibly great, careful planning and engineering about where you put your house, okay? Elevation, all this stuff, driveway, it's amazing. But yes, we have to be
I
careful.
mean, a lot of it is aligned with what we want to accomplish anyway,
That's
right?
That's right.
So,
That's right.
Well, right, but it's the stuff that's not aligned,
That's
that
right.
is what you potentially would be worried about.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Sometimes
so,
you just have to say no. And I don't know what the no parts are, but if we have to say no, we say no.
And I've had this conversation with Tom Rendero, and Walt may have been on the phone call with us, and this does go back about that. 6-7 months ago, and I said, look, you may have put in some symbolic resolutions about, we support this and we support that. I said, look, some of these things we might support and we might, but we also really, as a township committee, we really don't like doing symbolic resolutions. And frankly, we may take a no on some of those elements. And Don's position was, okay, just explain your position and just proceed.
the plan implementation agenda is negotiation. So,
It's not a take it or leave it thing. And I doubt that there's even that many deal breakers in the mix. But because I think the spirit and the language of planning and zoning in the past is doing so much of what they're saying towns ought to be doing. It's almost like they didn't look that closely.
That's what I did.
They want us to tell them all that stuff.
Like, you read their review and you realize, oh, they don't know about our stream card.
Right, and I do want to go back to something specific. And Frank, I thought this was raised by Barry in one of his emails. Who's asking for the hazard assessment. And I was fairly certain we said, and we told him in the past, that the hazard assessment was prepared by the county, incorporating Bedminster, and we identified that for him.
Right, but the thing they're asking for, Larry, is what we have, earlier in the year, Tom and I had told you that the land use law amendment requires the next time we update our land use plan, we have to do our own. We're gonna incorporate the county's work for sure, because they did a great job, but we have to do an assessment like that ourselves and include it in the land use.
that might be something that's done later in the plan.
Yeah, that could be a condition of planning.
Right, so that could be.
So you
deferred
agree
till
to that
later.
up front, and then you do it over the next few years possibly. So some timeline.
And by the way, we may have to do it to do the Bedminster AT&T property ordinance amendment, because then we should do that before we do the ordinance amendment. So it's not like too far away. You want to update your master plan to say that AT&T is in a new zone, that's an office research, development, whatever. You should do a master plan amendment of the land use map. The next subject, but it's segue well, which is, you've done it before, you did one for the office research. Property on Mills Road, right? Okay, and you amended the master plan, you have master plan, have the public hearing at the planning board, you amend the master plan, you amend that future land use map, trying to call for the designation on that property, right? In the master plan. Well, now when you do that, for a statute, you can't get away from a statute. You must include a vulnerability and hazard assessment analysis and the bells and whistles that the state statute requires, not an emergency regulation. And fortunately, we have authors from the county, which we can import in and put in your master plan. I don't know if you have to do anything more, whatever you have to do, you put bells and whistles in it. You put it in your master plan public hearing, you have it here, you do the hearing, you do the adoption here, and you refer the ordinance over to the township committee, and they can do the AT&T. Whatever ordinances that we recommend.
So I do want to come back specifically to plan endorsement. So what specifically are the next steps? It's redrawing the yellow line. And you're talking about doing one map, alternative A, extension of the Bedminster Town Center, alternative B, extension of the Pluckman Town Center. Well, do you agree with that, or do you just go in with one and say, this is our preferred?
I think it's makes sense to show both, and you can say one makes more sense than the other, but you can, based on the rules, you can justify either one. And I would start
Yeah, that's
there.
really what we wanted.
Okay.
If you don't like it this way.
And then what's the time, what else would go with that
So
submission?
then in
I just wanted-
response, you saw the long report, 88-page report by DEP, right?
Right, the last 5 pages are in bold, all the recommendations that the DEP offered for our plan and ordinances. That's what I'm gonna come back to you with as a list, and then a response in each case. Already did it, gonna do it, don't do it. That'll be the, so we, DOT had almost nothing we need to negotiate. I'll ask Paul to look through and see if he, how he would want to respond, but mostly that's a report card on stuff they're doing for you already. They're not challenging us with everything. They did talk about some better support for pedestrian movements by traffic calming and plugging in particular, but that was really the only kind of constructive recommendation I saw that sounded like the negotiation.
No, and by the way, I mean, Matt Seckler is on from, Stonefield, sorry, I blanked on
There he
Stonefield.
is.
So Matt's here from Stonefield, and so while he's here primarily for the second part, with county, or certainly with county support, we submitted the traffic or the proposed traffic improvements for 202, 206, Burnt Mills, and Washington Valley, which ostensibly is traffic calming and pedestrian safety for that intersection. And Matt, we're still waiting on the final approval from DOT at this point?
Yeah, we basically have had all the technical comments addressed, just waiting for some final kind of permit bonding information to come from DOT at this point, but the technical design has been blessed by DOT.
So how long will it be? Is there anything that I could do or Walt could do to help spur DOT to get that wrapped up?
I could give you a couple points of contact that could help move it along. My guess is without any push, we're probably like 6 weeks away. So with a push, we'd be something shorter than that.
Yeah, because I think that would be good, because then it would then, it's just something else for us to put into the plan endorsements.
Absolutely.
So Frank, what's the timing? Because that's, we've got some,
I can have this back to you for the next meeting if you want. We've got time on the agenda. I think we should, like I said, try to move this quickly.
yes.
Okay, that was quick.
Janine?
As of right now, we have nothing for July 7th.
No, I just wanted to put down in the record. Frank Banish said.
Somebody tell Terry.
After all these years.
After all these years.
I was in the building before. Okay, yes. First meeting in July.
So that means moving some yellow lines around and having some drafts on the other responses.
Back to you all a week ahead of time, so you have time to look it over.
A week ahead of time.
Oh, well, yeah, the weekend before, the weekend before the.
Weekend.
The holiday weekend?
Yeah, it is the holiday.
Is
right?
it? It is.
It is, 4th of July weekend.
That's when I make up all my lost time. Okay, very good. That's a commitment.
I'm happy to help anything.
I was counting on you to write it.
Not for nothing, but why is this an executive order?
Well.
Was it who issued it?
It was a very, I said I didn't understand it, but I do understand. It was a very creative way for the state planning commission to take an executive order from the governor to grant an extension of the center designation and endorsement process. I applaud them. Good legalese. Does it mean anything? It means exactly what we said to you before. You keep trying, they're gonna work with you, right? That's what.
Otherwise, they would, the centers would expire and you start from scratch.
And to me, like the whole planning idea of the center expiring, especially one like or two, is ludicrous because it exists. I'm sorry, it's existed for 250, 300 years and it's not going away. By the way, you really don't want your centers to go away because that's what makes them do work. So.
And the county has expressed the same sentiment to the state planning commission as well, regarding the centers and not expire.
It's the carrot and the stick. If you don't ask for endorsement, they want you to get centers with endorsements, so you'll come to them for the endorsement of the whole town. You are the easiest to say, yes, great job. If no one else is making it yours, but they've approved a few that they still don't even understand how they approved it. So basically, it should be sure, and that's how you do it.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? No? So I guess we can move on to AT&T.
Sure. So as we get into AT&T, I was at a economic development forum yesterday, actually. And one of the speakers was Jeff Otto. I actually missed 3/4 of the presentation. So we can only really report on the last 25% of the program. But a couple of comments that Jeff was making. You know, what keeps you up at night? The outward migration from New Jersey, despite what you might be hearing from Trenton, that there really is no outward migration from New Jersey. Jeff said when they looked at the numbers, and I think that the outward migration is focused on retirees. And he said, when we crunch the numbers a little bit in greater detail, 2/3 of the outbound migration were families or individuals with incomes over $150,000 a year. And from a Jeff's perspective, you know, the scary thing is these are people who could actually afford to live in New Jersey as a more expensive state, but have opted not to. So affordability of New Jersey remains a critical issue. Some of the other points that he hit upon is that he believes that the emphasis and the continued growth of the service sector as the basis for the New Jersey economy is not sustainable. And he said, you know, cannot survive on service economies alone, while, you know, Steve and I can, you know, push for the legal services as much as we want, between legal and accounting, maybe some support engineering. That's not enough to sustain the New Jersey economy, that you need to really have a more diverse sector. And that's not just in land use, but in economic development initiatives coming from Trenton and from the county. And we certainly know that the county is doing its part. One of the things he was talking about is building a fence around the pharma industry to encourage pharma to stay. And he said, whenever you hear the issue on drug pricing being too high, his concern from an economic development standpoint is, okay, eventually the pharma companies are going to say, okay, we're going to do what we can to reduce our expenses, lower drug pricing.
This is where our cost of operation are lower.
You know, really, we got this big buildup going.
Rich went to the entire presentation.
I didn't have to be there.
So, you know, for those of us who all touch on economic development and, you know, land use issues, environmental issues, and certainly Rich from the perspective of trying to keep these companies in his buildings, trying to get them into his buildings. Absolutely. And so when, you know, I'm listening to this and writing notes, I'm like, oh, I'm going to mention this at Thursday's meeting. And so as we do this, we just spend all this effort working with the county and the planning consultants to look at possible reuses and rezoning for the AT&T property. You know, this was, you know, ringing loud and clear. And it's certainly something I think that we need to be mindful of as we plan.
That's a great segue to Walter.
Yeah.
And timely, what a timely topic.
There you go, Matt, imagine that. So Walt, I don't know if you want to pick up on that piece?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, you know, how we reposition some of these assets that we have in the county is critical to build off. I think one of our strengths still remains our talented workforce and our education, our very educated, advanced degree workforce that we have. So the county is looking at, we're going to be updating our comprehensive economic development strategy. We're going to start that later this year. The whole idea is to help promote the reuse of places like the AT&T campus. That was a theme, in the current SEDS, which was, work to repurpose, reimagine existing and underutilized commercial properties. And as the pandemic shows that there's going to be lesser, office space needs, how do we basically position these? So, the talent remains here. So, the county is a multi-pronged approach. So, we just adopted our county preservation plan, which is updated the open space plan, the farmland plan, and historic preservation element. And there's economic development strategies woven into that planning document, because we look at it as those are amenities that companies or employees want to have. So if, with the trends of remote work, if employees can live anywhere, they got to be somewhat close to their business. So they want to live in great places with great quality of life, places like Bedminster and Somerset County, then we need to admit those are investments we've made as the county and our partner like Bedminster, like preserving farmland, is creating those amenities and having these great open space amenities is a talent attraction retention strategy. So we just hired a new economic development director. She has experience working for Choose New Jersey with Rutgers University with commercialization of research and economic development at the university level, but also she focused on, for the county she worked for before, life sciences and food manufacturing, which are all strengths that the county has. So we're really going to be doubling down on those efforts. The Board of Commissioners, the county administrator, myself, is putting a lot of effort into economic development to attract and retain the companies here and grow them, and also looking at how we can spin off new companies coming in, because we have Rutgers in our backyard, we have Princeton in our backyard, and we have one of the best, if not the best, community colleges in the country at RVCC. So especially with the innovation hub being built in New Brunswick, as things spin out of that, we want to move to Somerset County because we have these great open spaces and amenities, these great vibrant downtowns, these great recreational opportunities, and we have the coordination of planning at not only the county, at the state, but at the local level. That's why you want to invest here, because of that high quality of life. So that's where we're going. That's the broader economic county, the broader vision of the county when it comes to economic development. So we want to be able to, that's why I'm still here. Like after the study is done, like how can we help you implement this, and then bring those resources to make sure this plan moves forward and we create those opportunities. So hopefully AT&T, if they decide to leave, stays in Somerset County in some shape or form. But we want to make sure that we can, attract new investment into this area, consistent with what we've done at the Center of Excellence and a whole host of other places in the county, where we made sure that, we are going to be touting that we have this collaboration, culture of collaboration in the county, that we with our investment framework and working with our towns, like there's no guesswork on where development should go. Like we're clear on where preservation should occur, where development should occur. So, it should be an easier lift to invest here than someplace else. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. And that resonates in some of the discussions we've been having with companies like, we've aligned everything. So, we're rolling out, welcome that. So how can we help you? We're not going to steer you to a town that's going to have you go through 3 years of development hearing and then say no at the end. Like that's what the whole county investment framework is, to kind of show designated centers and endorsed plans, places where growth should occur. Like makes it a much more predictable process than rolling the dice, so to speak. So that's kind of share from where we're coming from and how this fits into some of the broader planning efforts.
I'd also like to add that we're not doing this in a vacuum, right? So this just wasn't Bedminster and the county and our consulting team, right? Certainly as part of the process, we had discussions with AT&T, we had discussions with MetLife, we had discussions with other stakeholders. Since the finalization of the study and the endorsement of the study by both the Land Use Board and the committee, I've continued to have regular discussions with MetLife, the owner of the property, as well as with AT&T. And they're all aware of where we stand with the recommendations. And I advised them both that Township Committee, we were giving direction, or we were giving direction to the Land Use Board to move forward on coming up with rezoning and proposing an ordinance to bring back to the Township Committee, working off the recommendations from the study. So, for example, MetLife was focused on some clarification or perhaps expansion and playing around with the accessory uses that were identified in the report as providing additional developable area, additional FAR. Had some discussions with Paul about additional FAR at the property. Paul has some pretty good ideas on how he thinks that can be addressed, and some of Paul's issues on FAR tied to perhaps a rejiggering of the site, which actually is not different from what MetLife was saying. That the site may, in the future world, may not be so far off, you may not be constrained by the existing product that's there. In other words, those buildings may not be long, and that the rezoning, one could certainly anticipate a reuse of those structures, but those structures were built, well, they were designed in the early 80s, probably on a model that was already 5 years old at the time. And that is not the model that you would employ for current corporate locations. And especially so if you're looking at the uses that were proposed and recommended in the report. Life sciences, high tech, multi-use campus with a lot of accessory space. So it may be more than a rejigger of the site, maybe a completely different layout. Paul's perspective of, okay, you could look at it as a blank slate and say, would you provide this sort of perimeter access road? Perhaps not. Might look at the access and the traffic patterns and parking demands very differently. One of the things that Paul mentioned is that, one of the great things about the property is that you've got that immediate access to 287 and 78. You have an unsignaled access onto 206 North. And when Paul started talking about some of these elements, that's said, okay, you know what, let's reach out to Stonefield and bring Matt in, because some of the traffic issues that Paul's talking about that are about the benefits of the site, and that traffic may not be that big of a deal for expanding FAR. So I wanted to make sure that Stonefield was involved in these discussions early on, and as our rezoning efforts develop further, that we make sure that Matt and Chuck are involved with us in the beginning, and we just don't dump it on them, maybe a month or two from now, saying, okay, we're ready to go with rezoning. Take a look at this and tell us, we've got your blessing on it. So that's why Matt is here. Just as we discussed, Paul is not able to be here. So I can, Paul sent me an email with some of his thoughts. I can get into that a little bit later. But I certainly want to, kick off with things are moving. The county has developed its plans, and there's an opportunity to move and to move quickly. And the same rationale that we started this with, and we discussed this at the Township Committee, is we don't want to be one of those towns that when all of a sudden their main principal rateable goes dark and there's no plan. We still hope AT&T stays and grows. That's not planning. So the job of the planning board is to be prepared and have everything set forth. We have a study that was recommendations, and I promised you all when we started this process, I don't know, 5 years ago. We weren't just gonna take the study, put it on a shelf and leave it there. And it was actually gonna be implemented in some degree. So let's start talking.
Yeah, when I was explaining what we did to our new economic development manager, she was excited that she may have opportunities to market this type of life sciences space, but we talked about, this report recommends some setup and, testing of scaling up technologies for production and all that. She's like, that is something there's a huge demand for. And I don't see that going away with life sciences, be able to scale up some of these things, especially with some of the research that's being done, at Princeton and Rutgers, but all
We
the
just saw one of the topics, I know that Rich, you and I will discuss this at one of our meetings during the planning report. One of the real estate rags this morning, reported that PTC was taking 360,000 square feet at Warren Corporate Center. And I really didn't get past the headline, but I flipped it to Rich, and I imagine that's a combination of office research, some manufacturing, I don't know what else is in there, but that's the type of use that we'd like to see.
We wanted to understand too, how much of it was kind of musical chairs maybe, because there's a piece of PTC down at the Center of Excellence, and if that's part of this migration, it would just move the chairs around on the deck. But they've been pretty successful, I think, down there at, took a while to get some traction, but even with the Township of Bridgewater kind of reneging on their, preliminary site plan approvals, they've been pretty successful leasing down there. So I don't know if we feel like we want to do the same sort of thing, here in terms of life sciences, or, do a little bit more of the technical, high tech kind of thing that you were, offering as one of the alternatives as well. But yeah, it's definitely, all I can tell you is it's definitely not office. So if it's life science or lab spaces, and some of these lab opportunities have been very productive for investors. So if investors are willing to pump big money into this site with the idea of a huge upside.
Yeah, I would just say that, having companies like PTC move here, it shows the existing pharma and life science companies that this is a place they need to stay, because this is where the talent pool is. Bedminster obviously has a very talented workforce, and same with the county. So these are things like making, no, Sanofi had talked about leaving, now they're staying. But part of it is that knowing that the county has these broader economic development, and building off this and doing things like this in AT&T, that the ecosystem is growing. We're moving the ecosystem and creating a bigger ecosystem than a contracting one. And that's going to feed off of, that investment is going to continue to spur other investments in the area. So having a town that's putting zoning in place to allow that helps continue that flow of investment.
And Rich, to your point about not just life sciences, but the high tech, the recommendation that it's in the report is not to focus on one of the three
Or the other.
recommendations, but all of them.
Correct.
And perhaps as part of the process that we're going to go through and that we're starting tonight, as well as getting some additional feedback from MetLife and maybe AT&T. That'll give us more ideas to, expand some of the recommendations in the report. Maybe hear eventually from Paul about, it's looking at the bulk standards that might be appropriate for the property. Paul seems to have a very, say, un-Paul-like approach in that looking at the site, and this was a conversation he and I had. He's like, setback is meaningless there. You can have zero setback because your real setbacks are going to be constrained by 287 and some of the environmental constraints. Other than that, who really cares? There's no neighbors there. Building height. Paul's position is who cares? FAR, who cares? As far as developable footprint,
The thing
You
that,
know, as,
when we start talking about
until
bulk-
Stonefield says, you know,
Yeah,
we
that's
hit
right.
the threshold.
that's kind of where I was gonna go. So if you talk about all this, bulk relief and that increases intensity, now those roads that are, marginal or somewhat acceptable now, what happens? You talked about going north is no traffic signal kind of thing, but, you get half a mile up the road and, 280, 202, 206 goes to, one lane north of Quick Check. And there you start the bottleneck. But one of the questions that I have, maybe Matt, and we have an answer, are they done with the 287 improvements in terms of, one of the big hangups is that you get on 287 going south. And, if you're doing it in the morning or if you're doing it at night, the single ramp onto 78 west, the single ramp onto 78 east kind of creates another bottleneck that sometimes feeds all the way back up to 202, 206. So is there another step to that improvement where they're gonna be widening those on-ramps for 78?
I'm not 100% sure. I know like they were not putting the missing moves in, but I think they were making improvements to the capacity for those. So some of that, I'm not sure. I have to go back and check. It's been a while since I looked at that.
Because I don't think anybody remembers when AT&T was fully developed and fully occupied and what that meant to traffic, in that, at the River Road interchange, right? But if we go back to any sort of intensity like that again, you're just, you go to my house to the Kings, it could take you 40 minutes.
But if it's a lab type of space, there may be more, you could end up with, if it's life science and more of like some of this manufacturing, there might be more space, but less employees because of the type of.
But maybe more truck traffic.
But, depending on, I think that what came out of the study was not the manufacturing that would be is not going to be if it's especially life sciences, like maybe it's not like you're making TVs or something like that. It's not going to be as intensive a trucking use, and maybe something a month's worth of, if it's let's say it's pharmaceutical production, a month worth of production may be in one tractor trailer type of thing, depending on like what is actually being produced. So it depends on the uses and all that, but having the advanced manufacturing space that can be testing out prototyping and those type of things would be fall into this revised, expanded definition of manufacturing, but necessarily wouldn't be, pumping out cars like.
Is there an easy way that you identify what kind of, Matt, is there a way that you identify what kind of traffic goes along with certain kinds of development?
Yeah, I mean, Matt could talk to it, but there's the ITE trip generation rates that talk, is a rule of thumb, but for the Matt.
Yeah, it's somewhat tenant specific. I mean, the IT does have rates for how much tractor trailer traffic there is for a warehouse, not a warehouse, lab type uses that'll give you generic numbers. But, as we've kind of learned is that, different tenants may have very specific, trucking requirements or parking requirements. So it does work on the tenant as well as the IT number. So it is, sorry for a vague answer, but there's no quick and, we come up with a average number, but someone could come in with very low trucking or very high trucking, or, they only need small products and they're just going to be bringing in vans. So it really is very tenant specific.
But there's still archaic ordinances, as we know, Matt, about how much parking you need on these sites if they're classified as light manufacturing or warehouse, et cetera. Less and less these facilities are, are less manpower, as you're suggesting, Walt, but we still have, zoning ordinances that require 2 per 1,000 parking and something that will never park 1 per 1,000.
Well, yeah, what we found is most of the, I would say, modern warehouse, modern manufacturing, unless it's a very labor intensive distribution center, the parking rates that are currently being used by many municipalities are probably double, if not 4 times, what we're seeing in real life when these sites are in operation.
So from a rezoning perspective, do we want to use a lower standard for something like that? And then if somebody comes in and needs more, then we can address it on a case by case basis, right? We don't want to take an average. We want to take a pretty conservative approach, right?
Well, I think what we're doing in a couple of our projects is banking some of those things. If and when they ever become necessary, we'll build them. But initially, you don't have to, and you may never have to if what they, you know,
And
if the trends continue the way they are
we
going.
just did that with KRE.
Right.
We did that, we approved KRE and they said, if we need that additional parking,
Restructure.
we'll do it. And that's, I think the way we left it, that was, you know, that sits with Paul Ferrera.
And, but you also put it in your ordinance, I believe. So plan ahead and plan it in the ordinance, so it's not a variance that you don't want, if you don't want to cause it to be a non-variance. You know, if you want it to be a non-variance, so you have to, and you can do that, but you have to be careful after it. And right now, I think it's a great start. There's an ordinance that came from the 10th day. I hope you got it. I noticed that maybe you didn't because of the rejection of emails and size of the attachment. Massive.
If you,
But in the, it's a neat email.
my screen, you have it?
Now it's back on the desk.
Okay, so you,
Come on, I've already here.
let me see if I can get
Done
on.
sharing.
Let me see if I can get on to the Zoom link.
Appendix A of the paper. There's a red line ordinance and then a draft amendment from planners that worked on this study.
I can go make copies of the I didn't want to make them if they were not.
You know, to the extent that the changes that are suggested to the OR zone provisions are pretty narrowly drawn. I mean, what we're looking at a red line that says you could get more interest in this zone if you did these couple of things. And what those things are, where it says research and engineering activities and describe what they all were, they're taking out words related to not involving manufacturing, sale, processing, or warehousing, and adding in, including in the fields of biotech, pharmaceuticals, and other life science industries. That's all good. The place we have to be worried about this is the next part, where they add production and assembly activities related to scientific investigation, engineering study, product development, and similar activities, including in the fields of biotechnology, pharma. So, and I'm not saying you have to be worried about that because it's a bad idea. It's a good idea to allow with the right limits for these things. What we don't want are warehouses. Tom and I talked about this earlier today. We don't want anybody else's warehouse just for the sake of the warehouse. If you're going to develop the kind of products that need this pipeline, and part of the pipeline is some warehousing on site, that's something we're probably going to need to allow them to do. So trying to find the right gradation for those things is much more the point here, rather than a yes, no, on, off kind of answer to that.
Maybe a percentage, right? Percentage?
Well, that's what I think it's up to us to come up with some. The other thing I didn't mention yet.
But they, even on another red line, they write a draft or alternative, which is, it has to be accessory to and incidental to
There's not anything we have.
principal use.
We have it online.
Right, warehouse
We have an
distribution.
email from Janine,
Yeah,
from June
it's online.
9th. I know it makes, the attachments are so big that some might have not gone through. It's not the biggest, we're not gonna decide, I don't think we're gonna decide something tonight. But we're trying to, remember how, and Larry said it too, you heard from the Baker Group, the planner, and Kate, I think, and another gentleman, and they talked to you about 3 alternatives, industries maybe to focus on. And you all said, well, why not also all of them? And then we like tech, we like pharma, we like high tech. Why can't they coexist or try getting one of them? And so they sort of done that in this draft. And it's really a surgical amendment to your current OR zone. But it's important surgery because it's saying broaden it quite a bit. I think maybe there's a few words we need to add about laboratories and there's some amazing stuff done in labs that are in fancy offices that are not bad, you know, so there. And then maybe you want some other things that are that could be done by that main principal user, like if they were a biotech company, that maybe you would let them produce RNA vaccine pilot, or even, you know, amazing thing is even the actual production is like in a vat, that is a biotechnology vat, that the DNA produces multiple copies of the same product by messenger RNA. It's amazing stuff, and it's small, they get top flight. So how do you allow that or something like that, even in an office building, or even in even in the existing buildings or a new building, and that's kind of manufacturing. It really is manufacturing. Sometimes it's actually manufacturing of incredibly valuable products in a very small system.
But we need to do it with sufficient definiteness that the person looking at the ordinance knows where that line is, where they, in other words, if you say no more than 10% of the floor area of a given business can be warehouse, okay, that's a measure, whether it's appropriate or not, that's a limit. We're gonna have to come up with some of those kinds of, that may be a rudimentary example, but it's not the best example.
I've seen some Chinese manufacturers moves out now to American manufacturers, where American manufacturers lost the business 10 to 15 years ago, now they're getting it back. I don't know if it's ever gonna go back to China, with all the shipping costs and everything else, so.
Well, it's a great time to have I guess you would almost call it a stranded asset when you think of what's happening to that site over time, right? And usually that's the worst thing that can happen to your rateable base. But in a time of flux like this, one of the things the consultants told us was, compared to going out and getting a new site and building new buildings, when these buildings are actually refittable in a way that these new tenants really want, this is something that can be really quick and it can deliver the different parts that they need of that system. So, I mean, we're lucky right now that this is our problem, because it could also be our solution in a lot of ways.
So what are we doing? I'm confused with this. I know that the whole presentation you guys gave was repurposing these buildings. Now we're talking about maybe, possibly, not that there's anything wrong with that, knocking them down, building something new. Does that expand our scope? Does that take more time? Do we have to do like similar to what we did at KRE and improve a design?
No, not really. What you're able to do is your zoning exists at 35 years old or whatever, with basically the corporate office building in mind. Single purpose.
Single user campus, right?
It doesn't require that, but it basically allows it. So to add on to that zoning, this is just one example, but the ways that they're saying here is focus for additional uses within buildings. No one is prohibited from tearing down buildings like this, or even if we try to by an ordinance, we really don't have the authority to do that. So basically, you make sure that you're allowing enough breadth of uses that the marketplace can occupy the space or build buildings that achieve new use. Maybe similar to TFT, maybe not, that are marketable now. And that's where the words of what's allowed matters, the words of what the accessory uses are allowed matter. I don't remember, we never really said we want all warehouse here. Okay, we might begrudgingly accept some warehouse or storage for someone who is there already for their needs. So that's really accessory storage. I'm not even sure it's really warehouses. I mean, it's certainly storage.
Yeah, if you look at the, just scroll to the accessory uses. So this is the recommendation from the planning consultant: warehouse distribution, sale of materials, products, or goods incidental to and in support of the principal permitted use. So you could then, through the zoning process, put further constraints on, X square feet or X percentage of square feet based upon what the principal permitted use is doing. To one of Tom's earlier points, one is to create a new OR zone for the campus, or, and I believe this was probably in the past, you have the OR zone, and then you may have 4 sites that are greater than 100 acres. You could do X, Y, and Z. So it may be something that we want to talk about is, are we talking about tweaking all the OR? Maybe there's, look, the FAR, the entire OR is antiquated. But the first and foremost is looking at this property, which is probably most susceptible.
The general requirements that 100 acres is.
Yeah, the 100-acre limit means this is the only site.
Right.
So if this is the only site, probably better to call it something new. Get a little panache out of the zone name that gets a little credit for the fact that we're updating things a little bit. Leave the other ORs the way they are.
And there's the,
But I would say, something happened about 20 years ago, and Frank and I were with the shift of the other ORs to ORB. And those are not ORB as a village.
Yep.
So Malancrot and Advance, Bedminster one, they are not technically in the OR zone. They are in an ORB, and those floor ratios and those are low. I have to compare and contrast. So this might be the beginning. I think it is good to think about that topic. Then you might think about village. Probably, I don't think you're gonna end up the same because those are parcels of land. Comparison will help you decide if you did want more density in some of these other ORD zones. And if you wanted those uses. Because you have public research, laboratory, biotech, and AT&T are okay with that. If it was in bed one or if it was in Mount Driver. Again, and so, good segue, but I think it's easier, at least it's easier logically to focus on AT&T because it is such a deep track, because you have focused study of them. And this ordinance is about OR, so it's about ordinance.
So while we have that sort of the bulk standards up there from the existing ordinance, and granted, the planning consultants did not touch that because they wanted essentially town engineering to weigh in, and based on my discussion with Paul, I'm just going to read some thoughts that he gave. Setbacks are almost irrelevant. Given the wetlands, the floodplains, proximity to 287, distance from 202 to 206, it really doesn't matter what the setbacks are. FAR will set the amount of traffic generated. Paul says, I don't think the volume of traffic will impact 202, 206. And the access as it exists today is virtually unlimited capacity, and he's referring to 287, 78. And he writes, envision a max size of building, say 2 million square feet, and I can work the FAR to figure that out, and perhaps you structure it in a way where there's some density bonuses for structured parking or anything else that reduces the amount of asphalt out there. So Paul was taking a pretty, he thinks there's a fair amount that can be done with that property. And by the way, back to Tim's comment, is that could work with some or all the existing buildings or none of the existing buildings.
And what you're describing to me, so if we're kind of clearing the deck for bulk variances and stuff, right? Once we get the uses aligned, whether it's OR or ORV, or even if we allow for a truly kind of linear operation where you've got that office, research, some production, and some warehouse with some kind of really truly linear operation. And I don't know if we, add proportions, no more than 10% of it can be office, with the appropriate parking with office, and no more than 30% of it can be warehouse. We start putting those numbers in there. And I don't know that we need to, but we can really develop this ordinance so that 90% of the applications are strictly planning board applications.
That's right. It's-
Right?
Yes, you can.
And they're just coming in for a site plan approval. They're not looking for use variances or bulk variances or anything else.
And certainly from the perspective of in discussions with MetLife, remember, so AT&T is a tenant. MetLife is the owner. MetLife is looking at life with AT&T, life with a little bit of AT&T, and perhaps life without AT&T. So if they're going to attract tenants or capital to the next version, whatever that may be, no one's going to want to go for the zoning board and variances.
I have a question. Is anything that we do with respect to this ordinance going to have an impact as to whether AT&T stays or whether MetLife wants them to stay?
No.
Sure. We know nothing more than we knew 3 years ago, whether they're gonna stay or they're gonna go. I remember Colin and I went through the master plan reexamination. Oh, we should know within a year or two, a year. It's
Tim,
amazing that we know nothing more.
it doesn't matter.
Whether they stay or go.
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter to AT&T.
Or does it matter?
It doesn't matter for us. The job that we're giving from the township committee is rezone, give us something following the recommendations from the planning study.
But we don't know if AT&T, we've heard nothing, or MetLife has heard nothing from AT&T.
I think AT&T is going to do what they're going to do.
There's
AT&T's gonna do what they're gonna do, and they've got
Exactly.
probably another 15 or 20 years of 5-year options
I
that
think it was,
that MetLife is locked into,
I think in
right?
October, they were supposed to give notice of what they were gonna do.
November.
November.
Of this year.
But they're like
This-
5-year rolling
Well,
options.
this year, but have they done that?
It's not November of this
Not
year yet.
November. They're
Well,
not
I'm
gonna
sure
do
they
it.
have, it was 90 days beforehand, I thought it was. November 3rd.
That's the 90 days beforehand.
I think the point is, I think it was, we don't build in not to build a response just for AT&T or to try to accommodate AT&T or to try to keep them somehow or another either in town or on that site, right? The goal is to attract investment, attract tenants to something that we can transform easily to suit their purposes, which are completely different than they were 45 years ago when they built that site.
But that wasn't my question. My question was a little bit different.
Yeah.
Larry answered my question, I assume you understood.
Yes.
As planning board, we have to set up this for the next generation of Bedminster residents. Because even if AT&T does stay another 5 years, we just come back to this situation.
Don't taunt us again in 5 years.
If not soon.
All right, let's go on further. I don't know how.
But it all
many
depends
options
on
they get,
MetLife,
Larry. Like,
but they want a lot of options.
I think Larry put it very well. If we're going to attract investment, attract tenants, we've got to make it easy for them as opposed to this, long, drawn out 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, you get a nice maybe.
That's the tendency.
This is what's driving people to the other states.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. So I think the mayor is spot on. Like,
Right.
Bedminster's got to lead, put the vision of what they want on the site. And you guys are doing that through the study, because you can't let AT&T or any tenant wag the township, so to speak.
So I think probably what we need to do next is make sure, since you said all of the above as your response to those 3 scenarios, Tom and Paul and I should probably go back through this red line look to see what it doesn't do that you want to do. And the biggest thing it needs to do, it already does. That was the thing that opened the door for a whole lot of these types of uses that are not going to get somebody else to give them a variance to do all these different things. So that's great. I think we just want to make sure that if we're going to create a new zone or tune this one up, that we give it every bit of energy it can have that fits together, that makes sense coherently.
And what I'd recommend is not just you guys, but also with Paul and with Matt.
Yeah.
And as I get information, whether it's from AT&T or from MetLife on accessory uses, for example, one of the things that Met said they would like as an accessory use, and they first proposed it as a principal permitted use, was data centers. I said, no. As a principal permitted use. Now, as an accessory use to support a principal use that's conforming with perhaps the three recommendations. Yeah, maybe.
Because there's already an awful lot of infrastructure there to support that kind of use.
And by the way, so at that economic forum, there was an AT&T, our government liaison from AT&T was there. So he and I were actually discussing that very issue yesterday. So for the 25% of the program.
So if you're talking about
maximize my presence.
Now, if we're talking about transforming this potentially from 900,000 square feet with another 300,000 square feet approved today, 1.2 million square feet to upwards of 2 million square feet, the biggest concerns are traffic, right? That's really the biggest concern.
Right.
And, and what you might see from the highway or not see from 206 and how it kind of changes, I don't know if anybody wants to see 10-story high rises coming out of the little glen down in there, but 5-6 stories, something that you'd hardly notice until you drove in. Who cares? I'm kind of with Paul on some of that, but I'm concerned about what could very rapidly become a gridlock type of scenario, depending on what kind of truck and what kind of car traffic we actually end up having there.
Right, and really, what Paul and I were discussing, and that's why Matt's here, right? So we want to make sure the traffic is not left to the end, but is integrated into, look, this is going to be an iterative process that we're going through. Back and forth. MetLife may come in with some ideas, maybe TNT comes in with ideas. Our engineers will be going back and forth and responsive to the questions that we pose. And I think that issue is one to direct to Matt. And when Paul's back, Matt and Paul can walk through those recommendations. And, Matt's got a sense of what the traffic demands and what the parking demands are realistically for each of the scenarios. And, in the the accessory structures, or the accessory uses, I think we've got warehouse distribution. But for example, in one of the recommendations, we talked about conference centers. We talked about gyms, elements that may actually be open, not just to the campus, but for Bedminster residents as well. So
those are,
That might not be accessory, though. That might want to allow, that when you say open to the public, that means probably a principal use. And
Outside of.
Was Lifetime considered accessory in Bridgewater?
Lifetime is definitely a principal use, and it is permitted by a rezone.
Okay.
So,
and that place is packed.
and that's true, almost every one of them throughout the northeast of the Part 11.
You can't get a parking spot on one.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, you really gotta make
Do you
sure
like it?
if you have a class that you're getting there with enough time.
So, is that just nuts? Like on Friday night?
And they have 5%, like 5 per thousand parking.
Yeah, they have a tremendous amount of parking. And But,
I can never get parking.
so if you wanted to attract one of those or a similar thing, you put it in principal permitted uses, and I mean, that's your call, that you make sure you recommend it in the master plan and then the ordinance, but let's put a note at least that you're thinking about it.
And by the way, they want to build like 150 over the next 18 months across the country or some ridiculous objective they have.
Let me ask this if I can, because it'll help us tune this up quicker. The mixed-use connections recommendation in the study suggested that there'd be 30,000 square feet of restaurant, brewery, and event space, 30,000 square feet of arts, culture, and retail, 50,000 square feet of commercial recreation, indoor or outdoor, and a 100-room hotel. Most of those things will involve motor vehicles that aren't trucks for most of the trips, where some of the other uses we're talking about will be a lot of trucks. I don't know if this is part of what you wanted. When you said all of the above, I just think it's good if we go back to what they said were recommended and see if you really mean all of those things.
Right, and I think
They're not
that's,
in Exhibit A, okay? So-
Yeah, they're not included yet.
yeah.
Okay, that's what I was.
So they are not permitted uses as we describe it right now?
They wouldn't be unless I
So-
added it.
Not what he just read.
So this is the proposed ordinance that Kate put together. And so accessory uses, off-street parking, right, fences, signs, garages, temporary trailers, employee services. Right, the only thing that she added was warehouse distribution, sale of materials, products, or goods incidental.
You know what, let me do this.
It's not really, when you talk like this, you're not really talking about accessory. You're talking about mixed use.
Correct.
Additional principal uses in a mixed use environment, you don't have to.
You're absolutely right. So when we look at OR, so she really tailored this proposed ordinance around the life sciences, high tech. So this is really geared towards the life science option.
Why don't I do this? Why don't I put together what I think would be all the compatible choices? And when we come back to it, you'll cross off the ones you don't like. Because I think it'll be the quickest way for us to say, rather than, we could spend hours right now doing this, and I'm happy to, but I could save you all a lot of pain if you want me to just bring it back. I think we could do
I think
this.
we
in
need to
July
incorporate
5th.
a certain amount of limited production too. So if you have somebody who develops a product on this site, whether it be a medicine or some kind of, microchip or some deal, that they could be able to do a limited
It's in
amount of
here.
production there,
Here.
right?
And the
That's
warehouse.
another-
For some of those,
That E, production, that's not the activity.
yeah.
Yeah, I think he's got the right.
Notice how we avoided the M word?
You have say it.
I don't know that you really should, but if you really like. Larry, you and I do this. Environmental regulation of manufacturing is so significant in the United States that the level of protection to the worker and the environment is so great inside the building, people inside and outside, that
Just minimize the
manufacturing
faces.
is really not dirty. Okay? And it is not environmentally negative, particularly where you have public water, public sewer, which you have. So I don't consider manufacturing a dirty work, but that's up to you. And so production it actually means the same thing, land use. So that being said, I think you're right, maybe about percentages, but I have to say, when you have an option of 2 million or 1.4 million square feet in existing buildings or new buildings, to try to imagine what's the maximum square footage that someone who's making widgets or high-tech wafers that have microchips on them, kind of wants in your primary facility, you're maybe overly imagining your ability to predict, okay?
So making a prescription of how much of,
I
is not a good idea.
I can't tell you, I can't, and we do this all the time. We planners and lawyers can't tell you what they're gonna come to you with for their percentage of storage space for their 30,000 square feet of office.
But if we want OR, can we just say the majority of the space needs to be OR and anything else is considered secondary?
Once you say majority,
Yeah, but when-
49% could be warehousing and distribution.
Exactly.
And at 49%, you may be asking for a lot more trucks than you want. If that's the thing that catches on the most, the fact that you can have a lot of warehouse here and do distribution from here, the complexion of the traffic's gonna, that should tell you better.
And by the way, on warehousing and distribution, which is a good chunk of my daily job, when I met with Net and they were trying to, just throwing out there, multifamily.
Again,
They sweetened multifamily by saying, oh, by the way, if you noticed, we didn't ask for warehousing. I said, oh, that's good. That's good. That's a great start.
Is there any way we can by ordinance limit truck traffic on certain hours?
Limit the traffic that's on the roads.
Truck traffic that
Or-
comes in on certain hours, in other words, in effect, say, you have to come in between 12 and 6 in the morning.
Boards do it all the time.
Cole would say you can, but no one's gonna enforce it, right?
No.
Steve, it's hard by ordinance, there's case law, 711 case that basically says you can't regulate the hours of operation. What happens is applicants offer their proposed conditions that people agree to the condition in the course of site plans, and that's why it happens all the time. Sometimes it happens as a result of noise control realities. The truck can't comply with the nighttime noise standards. It's 200 feet away or 100 feet away on private property. But the reality is, the answer to that question is generally no, you can't by ordinance. So you have to imagine that there will be 24-hour operation and that the person telling before you will say no to your request to limit the hours.
And then the question is whether it's enforceable if it's a condition of the approvals, and then whether
It
it's
generally
fine every
is.
day they don't do it.
It generally is enforceable as a condition of approval, provided it was represented that that's what they wanted to do, because then you're enforcing it as what they promised. And they are the applicants for their use and their subsequent users of the same site. But then you're right, enforcing it and sending the zoning officer out at 2 a.m. to stop a trucker, for the police to give a ticket is very difficult, okay, and very challenging.
Maybe we could deputize some residents to be.
Hey, George, you want a badge? I'm a bit of an insomniac.
Towns are done, let's try to do, don't they have an ordinance and have they already figured out
Yeah,
the amount of warehouse that's incidental to.
I have never resisted the opportunity to copy from somebody.
Is that why you're gonna have that?
That's what I'm gonna go look at. You guys say, yeah, do that. I'm gonna go find those things, yes.
It's pretty hard.
Obviously places have done that,
But we can,
center of excellence.
but we can limit the warehousing to the business, right? So it's only stuff that you delivered to as part of the manufacturing process, and only product that is delivered on site can be stored there.
Which we should. Otherwise, we have an Amazon.
Yeah, and we don't want the Amazon thing, right?
The draft sets it up from Dana or the scheme, price bill, sets it up as an accessory use for warehouse distribution and sale of materials, products, or goods incidental to and in support of the principal permitted uses. That kind of works for the manufacturer, the production company, the laboratory company. Maybe you want to have something more that says by the user of the principal use, you try to be as clear as you can be in these things. Why did I say that? Because somebody can come in and say, well, I'm a tenant here and I'm going to store for AT&T who's making the wafers, okay? And no, AT&T has to store for AT&T, or if that's what you want, okay? But I really think and Frank's going to try to do it, is when you talk about a restaurant, when you talk about a fitness center, we want to use the name brand. When you talk about a hotel, when you talk about any retail, a retail building, a retail little mini mall, or whatever, I don't even know what they have at the food center or whatever it is in the Homedale, but brewery, all those, few things or whatever, you have to say in the ordinance that that's permitted, and that will probably be owned or rented by someone other than the drug company, the biotech company. And they'll be happy they're there, and they'll expect the landlord to get them there, and they might even make it a condition of their lease that they have a restaurant there. And you don't want the junky restaurant, you want something good. So basically, if you don't permit it as a permitted use, it probably isn't gonna happen. 'Cause then-
So,
Because then
you know,
it's
to,
very.
and to take that and put it into some context, another pharma company, which Walt and I won't name,
Why not?
in our area that may or may not be leaving its campus, in looking at new facilities, was looking for something that is a little more, I don't want to say urban, but has more opportunity for things for their
connected.
employees to do.
More connected to.
More connections. And to a large extent, that's consistent with the third recommendation from Kate, which is, okay, you know, you can have your life sciences, you could have your high tech, or you could have other office type uses, but look at expanding the opportunities at the campus.
For services.
Like,
Services.
are we talking residents or just like commercial supporting the?
Commercial support. So once again, the conference center, the Lifetime Fitness, the restaurants.
Connell is a good example.
Yeah, Connell, right. And remember when we all went down to Homedale? I mean, it's one, just, you know, it's whether you look at it as one massive building or four buildings that are connected. You have, you know, what do you have? You've got a library, you've got restaurants, you've got the coffee shop, you've got another restaurant, you've got, you know, the dog place.
Daycare.
Daycare, you now have the conference center and a hotel that's going on the roof. You've got,
Are a lot of outside people coming into that? I know.
Yes.
There's
Yes.
venue there
Absolutely.
for, venue there for
Yeah.
weddings and things like that. too.
Yeah, I know folks that live down there and they go there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we're going there for, they're going there for music.
Yes,
that
farmers market.
Yeah, well, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
that's right.
There's a farmer's
And God
market.
forbid we get ground
They need
floor.
markers.
We get those ground floor shit.
Well, if they show up.
You wouldn't need them, right? You wouldn't need them.
No, and so they actually, I think their farmers, the Homedale Farmers Market, I believe is a Wednesday. And I was coming back, I think I had a meeting in Long Branch and I just pulled in to check it out, and that whole middle area, not the whole middle area, but the middle area, what they call their.
Where the surface to air missiles are buried?
That's in the back. That's out in the back. Yeah, they had it set up and people are coming and they're parking and they're going in and out of that building, and there's a fair degree of public. It's odd. It's still odd to me because it's not Homedale Town Center, but it's certainly attracting residents and others to go there, who go there just to eat or have a drink.
Right off the.
We talked about that early on in the process. We were talking about certain destination kind of functions, right? So there you go. Can we look at what they did in Homedale? Just lift
Yeah,
on
sure,
that?
sure, it's great, absolutely, nothing's copyrighted in zoning ordinance.
Yeah. I'm intrigued about what's,
But then you be careful, what you do is you ensure it tells what you want and what you don't want. Prohibit the ones you don't want. And so this is a good beginning, but we should do what Larry said before, and we also have to do, Frank has to do, and I don't know, my master plan subcommittee, we need to do a document that is a master plan amendment that amends the future land use element. And we have to give this some name. I think it's not an OR anymore, I think it's something else. So that's something that we work with Frank on. So this is how it is, but remember how you did a master plan amendment for
Yeah.
or Burn Mills Road, you're gonna do a similar document, It is a public hearing, and once you're ready to do it, it lays the way for this, this zone, and if you want to talk about other zones, we need to do that at other zones too. Don't think they're gonna be the same. No. I don't see the practical, given how big
The acreage of this.
AT&T is and how focused your attention is on this, okay?
Yeah.
I think you can do the other zones if you want to, but I don't think it's gonna be the same zone. It might have some similarities, might have some uses that are permitted. But that's up to you too. And if that's a master plan, future land map.
Rich, we said, so I just pulled up the, not the appendices, but the main report. And I thought there were some examples that were given here.
Yeah,
Yeah, there were
yeah,
examples in every.
that's the Berkeley Heights project, the On3 project.
Yeah, and the Berkeley Heights project was a tunnel project that might be another good model.
And what's the one down in New Brunswick? Is that right on Route 1 there? Or when you get numbers?
But the innovation hub is actually right across the street from the train station.
Okay, and that's, but.
That's the state, that's the innovation hub, the state's building.
Okay, okay.
That like Princeton, Rutgers, yeah, the Mongolian barbecue.
But they're back all the rest of New Brunswick for the ancillary stuff. Right?
Yeah.
You could think about not using FAR at all. For this zone, because of the things Paul explained this clarity. And why do I even bring that up? Because if you don't use FAR, then as long as the use is permitted, and you can even ask for more floor area than you are capped at. If you be capped for, you said can be no more than 1.75 million square feet at this site. That would be its bulk standard, not a floor area ratio standard. And then if you ask for 180,000 square feet, it would not be a D variance. It would work without flaring and column or any number. It would be a planning board map. I don't have a strong opinion. The reason FAR is a D variance is because the statute says floor ratio variances are a D variance. It also says height over 10 feet or 10% is a D variance. And it says density greater than the density of residential density of the zone is a D variance. They're not a classic use variance, they're just statutory D variances. So just imagine, frankly, if you tear down multi-floor buildings and you don't build 3 stories or 5 stories, you'll never achieve what they are that's out there already.
But a lot of those things that you're talking about, taking away or not using, are the things that we, with our limited amount of things that we do up here, that's how those are the numbers we've used to judge growth and to judge traffic and to judge what's going on.
They are, but they're not in a sense what in this property because imagine this zone when it was originally crafted to apply to 5 tracks. So that's what Paul is saying. A setback variance on the AT&T property is almost meaningless.
Sure,
You never
but
get-
FAR.
FAR can matter.
That, I was really.
Well, it
thinking
can
about
matter,
FAR.
and I'm not saying you shouldn't have FAR, I'm saying if you take it off as a standard, you can have all these other standards or some other new standard, including a maximum square footage, and deviation from it is not a D variance. It's the D variance that triggers a need to ask for more, for floor ratio, a need to ask for more square footage than allowed. So and floor ratio is a complex subject. It's really it's all of the floors, all of the square footage of all the floors of every building on the property, counted up, all added together over the total area of the land. So if you have 100 acres, floor area ratio of 15%, a lot of square feet, okay? It probably is 1.65 million, something crazy like that. But basically, the bigger the tract you have, when you have floor ratio, you basically can have almost very high numbers because you stack the floors and that's what's counted. If you're gonna have one-story buildings, you're never gonna get to the floor ratio of 1.6 million or 1.8 million because you cannot fit it on the existing impervious surface, which is pretty much where all developments can take place on the 18th tract. So that being said, I'm not trying to give you any more details other than, look at the bulk standards, think about, well, what are the standards, how do we control it? And that's what you.
How do we control the traffic?
That's right, and that's what Rich is getting at, and that's what we have that. Maybe there's something about that we're gonna be doing. Maybe there's going to be some sort of, it's hard to do, I don't think you can have traffic maximum, okay, but you can have maybe a total respective development maximum. Okay, and then you work backwards from that.
But also an office use, pure office use would be the biggest traffic generator. So if you look at AT&T as maybe the maximum amount of traffic existing there now, or when they're at their peak, that would be the maximum level of traffic that could be generated.
Yeah, right. So you're looking at, when AT&T was a little over 3,000 employees, that does not include the building that was approved but not built. So there's another 300,000 square feet.
25% more.
Yeah, so that would put you at, almost 4,000 employees.
And the employee density, if it's a lab or some of this life sciences space, will be a lot less than
Right.
an office use,
So you could accommodate more FAR, more developable area,
Because you have alternate uses.
but not with having less
Right.
traffic than is already permitted at the
And
site.
when the county did the initial work for the Center of Excellence project, the mixture of uses on that site didn't exceed the peak office use. So, yeah. You're talking about mixing uses on this.
Yep.
Probably stay below with the peak traffic use.
Yeah, the biggest thing really is gonna be the change in the traffic complexion. As you move into some of the newer uses of more truck traffic, that's where that's gonna
Yeah.
be disfigured.
And Paul's comments to me was use traffic and back off the traffic to an FAR and mix of uses that works. So you're essentially, traffic becomes.
I'm interested in the models that Matt can speak to. I'm interested in the models that we're seeing just 2 years, right, of work from home strategies. No one's going back to work 5 days a week anymore. It's just not happening.
Unless you work for.
Elon, maybe.
Right.
God bless him. But if you have 4 per thousand parking and only 60% of your building is ever occupied, you're never going to use the 4 per thousand parking. So these new models are, if they haven't even come out yet, because this is all like revelation stuff. But parking demand isn't going to be as high. 3 years ago, we were passing variances for people to go up to 5 per thousand, 6 per thousand, because they needed it to accommodate, all this benching and stuff that they were doing in their office space. Now they're not coming back to work ever, probably. So even if it was 900,000 square feet of office, it's not, 3,600 cars.
Well, like Mark said, it's not, the big difference too is rather than the office peaks, right? Everybody's showing up for 9 o'clock or 8:30, whatever it was. You have 3,000 cars. Now you're not gonna have that. You're gonna have a lot less employees spread out over a much longer period of time. Some truck traffic mixed in, which can also be distributed over time. And again, that'll help us figure that part out.
And to another point is, and this maybe that Matt can address. How much of this is additive traffic versus replacement traffic? So this is people people who may be otherwise, they live in Bedminster, or they live in the surrounding towns. They're already driving through Bedminster to get to 287, to get to 78, to go to another place. So it may be the same traffic that's already passing through town, but now it's pulling in and staying there. So it may be, this is I'm probably out at the limit of my ability to speak on this subject. So Matt, please rescue me if you're still there.
I'm still here. Again, we've done models like that in the past. When we've done some, let's say, hospital modeling where we knew where their employees were coming from and they were going to move to a new location and be able to almost like diffuse traffic on the road. But there are models that we could do to basically capture that. Again, if this becomes a hub, instead of people driving to a place of work in Morristown, instead they're coming here, they were already on the roadway network, leaving town, then they're staying in town. That's obviously not going to have the same impact as someone coming new to the area. Going back to what a bunch of council members or board members said earlier was, I think parking is one of the key aspects to kind of limiting the traffic that is being generated. I mean, everyone who drives needs to have a place to park. So, you know, we've done this before where you almost want to find that sweet spot where you're only allowing them to develop, let's say, a certain amount of parking, and that way you keep your traffic levels down. And then if they need to come back and they need more parking or they generate significantly more traffic, that's when there maybe are triggers to improvements to the area and, you know, investment in infrastructure, items like that. But again, I see it more and more where, you know, empty parking lots is bad for environmental reasons, and it also opens you up to a potential user that comes in that then wants to fill that parking lot, and all of a sudden your traffic levels double. So I really think parking is going to be the key piece here if you're looking to limit the traffic, because there's no other place to park. A tenant nowadays, they look and they know, hey, I don't want to spend $1 extra on parking, but I also need to make sure that my staff has a place to park if we're moving here.
Also, this is for Matt too, there may be a way to use the existing highway access management permits that projected maximum trips, if there is such modern one for the property. The some path that we propose in the ordinance, again, that's a C variance type. Everything else less than that. Now that's unusual, but this is an unusual property too, at one meter.
That's exactly what we did with the Santa Fe site, looked at their highway access permit for the maximum number of trips, and then work the land use to kind of create trip generation pattern that really exceed.
And then the developer or user live within that budget.
And that also becomes the advantage for them, because they don't have to invest in offsite improvements that would drive up the cost of the development project.
And this is a one-way in, one-way out site. It's not like we can go find the other access. There is no. I have a pretty good idea what I'm supposed to do next. Do you want to do this for all of this stuff for the first July meeting?
If you could do it, Frank.
Yeah, I'll do it. Make sure we got it.
Janine?
Yeah. Did you get that right?
Make Frank sign your notes on the way out.
Send me email to Terry now.
Okay, so we have a meeting now on the 7th. And we have Goldman on the 14th.
Yes, Alfieri is still
Up in the air.
technically
Up in the air,
on for that day. I mean, that's what they originally said. but
right?
I haven't heard from them and
You're not.
don't plan on hearing from them, but
No.
All right, so we'll have Goldman and if you have any leftover discussion, we can do that on the 14th as well. Yeah. So we have 2 meetings in July. And that's all we have. so, right, anything else, Jenny? There is not, so we need a motion to adjourn. Unless you
moved.
have something you want to say, Mr. Mayor.
No, no, no. Thank you all for voting.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Matt.
Good night, Grayson.
Thank you, Walt.
Thank you all for coming, we appreciate it.